Welcome, everyone, back to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at the most likely energies coming into play this week that are likely to affect your world and your future. This week, we are once again doing a review of last week's reading because so much did happen to play out that it's worth going over, even though at the time of this recording, or this writing, on Friday, August 23rd, 2013, the entire predictive period isn't over yet. But before we do the review and get into the show, we have a usual disclaimer that all readings done on the show are for entertainment purposes only. But like any form of entertainment, these readings can be used and considered when making your own very personal life decisions. This week's show may be a bit shorter than usual because of a combination of real-life commitment that I just have to get done, and because I'm also working on new innovations for the second half of the show, and sometimes entire shows, that may be including some lessons and things like how to do your own reading, reading for yourself, easy psychic self-protection, and other kind of issues and questions that psychics get. So if there's a topic you would like me to go into in future shows, perhaps even sometimes having guests or going into them myself, please send me an email at melodyreader@gmail.com. That's Melody with an I. And let me know. Also, I'm still happy to accept questions for on-air private readings. I think that's kind of fun, and I'd like to do that like maybe once or twice a month. Just put show reading in the title and send me questions. And as long as they're not legal or health questions, I'll look at and consider using them on the show. But for this week, I think very important things came up in the card review that I want to make sure we get to go over. And they came up in the general reading for this coming week, and I want to make sure that this information gets out there. These cards were originally pulled and looked at on Friday, August 23rd, 2013, which is when I wrote the majority of this review. And I have a note here for Saturday, August 24th, when I'm actually doing the recording, that trends already seem to be building and leaning in a particular direction, which I'll discuss more when I actually go over the cards and do the reading. But I decided it was very important to really go into this and let everyone know about it rather than just skip a week because of the other commitments I have. So shorter show, more to the point, but important information. However, I expect to see a lot more of these trends and symbols from the last few weeks coming together in the coming weeks as well. And I think they're going to help to make sense of what's been building for a while now and what seems to be moving energy-wise from a point of expectation of something to the manifestation of the energies and to some real-world situations and actions. So stay tuned and don't go away. We'll get back with the review of this week's cards and runes for the coming time period and last week's as well, right after these short messages. All the music used on the show today is from Musicalley.com, your source for free-to-air music for podcasts. The artist plays their music up for free to air in hopes that you, the listener, will visit their site and purchase some of their outstanding musical offerings. So after the show, why not visit Musicalley.com and explore their extensive playlist?
She sings, she goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wings.
Have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodypsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
And see me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland. See me from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland.
Welcome back to this week of Cat's Eye in the Future, where this time we're actually going to do our usual weekly review of the cards and runes for the coming week. We'll be back next week, hopefully, with our regular, completely two-part show. But for now, let's dive in and see what's in store. Well, first I want to do a review of last week's cards and runes that show the Raven Never card is in exactly the same position now for 2 weeks in a row. But the difference is, even though this week and last week we have the same Raven card right in the middle of the reading, last week we had the birth cards and the mother card sort of framing the reading. And I predicted then that it would be a time period when there might be negative stories about birth, children, or even a threat to child welfare, because we also had the destruction card right in the middle there along with the Raven. If you want to review these cards, you can see them at my website. They will have been the reading for episode 14. We're now at episode 15, and the cards for both of those should be up there, and you can see them. Sadly, and unfortunately, my prediction of this harm to children proved to be totally accurate with the used poison gas in the Syrian civil war that's led to these horrible graphic pictures of tiny bodies that just grip the world in the press and on the internet. And you just, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't get away from these poor tiny little bodies of children and crying mothers. And this fits totally and completely with that energy. Also, we must not forget that thousands of other children in the Middle East and other areas were trapped, but particularly in Syria and the surrounding areas, or they had to leave as refugees. And again, we saw these pictures of mothers with their children walking towards camps and things. And it's just affecting a huge number of mothers and children living there. I'm not getting into who's responsible. That's another entire issue. But they pinpointed directly the destruction that took place from bombing and gassing throughout that part of the world, and especially the world headlines of the bodies of the children. Now, we also have the body card, which, again, bodies, people, children, it just all sort of played in. But it also indicated a possible health threat, because usually the body card in a regular reading is about health or the physical world, or in the case of, sadly, some of the stories from past week, actual bodies. But our health stories were accompanied by the Dagaj, or the Sun at Dawn rune, which has hints of radiation as well as situations becoming more clear in a symbolic sense. The new day begins to literally dawn on people. So I think the Dagaj and body rune, well, they played out certainly in Syria, but they also came out really strongly, and possibly even more strongly, in the increasingly dire information coming out about the aftermath of the nuclear disaster in Japan, which of course is affecting bodies of people and health in general. It seemed nearly every day there was a more worrisome story this past week coming out about news about what was going on, and it sort of culminated by yesterday being Friday, yesterday's request by TEPCO that they actually really did need international help in dealing with the situation. Now, anyone who's familiar with Japanese culture at all knows that they're extremely reluctant to ask for outside help. So this raising of the alert and this asking for outside help, again, sadly went right along with that prediction. And also, I think the body card was indicating threats to, ocean water, food supply, and the health of people in Japan and in the Western world. I mean, again, it just flags it. And again, there's that destruction card, which I think played out mostly in Syria, but also has potential to play out in Japan as well, and again, spreading throughout the world possibly. We'll just have to wait and see. As expected, after a rather slow and stuck start, because last week we had the Issa, the ice rune, at the beginning. And once the sun started to rise a bit and started to melt off, some of the very intense and serious stories started to appear, and just then they all sort of spring up at once, which again, you get this idea of almost a glacier, and the sun comes up on the glacier and it starts drip, 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 melting, and then suddenly it's this little stream, and then the stream gets bigger and turns into a flood, and that's kind of the image we get here. Even the sun itself seemed to get in on the act, which again I predicted might happen, throwing off a few solar flares here and there. I think it swallowed a comet too, rather picturesque and fascinating for people who follow astronomy. But these were thankfully not Earth-directed, or the ones that were Earth-directed were not harmful that we know of, but they seem to be echoed in the outbreak of hundreds of more forest fires. I'm not saying that these are physically connected to the solar cycle, but psychologically they're part of the same Daguj energy. Some of the other runes would even be closer to forest fires than doggish, but they certainly fit in with just an overall sort of solar time period. As of the reading on Friday, August 26, 2013, we also see the predicted larger than usual number of energies all competing for prominence on the world stage. We had mothers, children, radiation, fires, warfare, riots, economic attacks, even a stock market glitch. Again, that Esau rune, and when I was reading during the week on my weekly blog, we got a Hagalaj rune, which is the hail strike on the same day the NASDAQ got hit with either what might be an attack or just a computer glitch, but it shut everything down. We had solar flares competing with drummed up stories about possible slight improvements in employment that they were really trying to play up. Western economies, along with some other kind of hidden but breaking sort of dawning stories, again, about the derivative crisis that really hadn't gone away, and calls for possible prosecutions for those involved in the previous economic mess in 2009. All of this mixed in, especially in the US, the UK, and Ireland, with scary stories concerning healthcare, social welfare cuts, crime, immigration, and racial unrest. And don't forget the daily stories about growing radiation debacle in Japan, where no one seems to have a clue what's going to happen next, or worse, what to do about it, as I talked about a few minutes ago. Well, many of these stories are always kind of simmering beneath the surface. It is unusual to have so many playing out hard and fast and one right after the other in the public sphere, especially during the usual summer in the Northern Hemisphere, which reporters like to call the silly season. This is when European and North American countries, well, they no longer totally shut down for the month of August like they might have had 50, 70 years ago. It's still the time when a lot of people take vacations, and the news tends to be a bit more about cute kittens on YouTube and the latest film release and who's going to be Batman, which was also in the news. But it was not the primary story. It sort of got melded into a stew pot of really serious, over-the-top, and kind of scary stuff. More the sort of thing you generally expect to see on the headlines in September, October, or even February, but not so much in August, especially in Europe, where some places do still shut down. I tried to order some wool for some knitting, a sweater for my husband, and the factory just shuts down for August. That's becoming increasingly common as a revived thing that they used to do here in Europe, and I think to some degree in the US as well, because they didn't have to pay their employees. So they used to shut down during August to have a vacation ostensibly, but also to save money. And I think with the recession, more and more, particularly production companies, are going back to that sort of thing. So again, we see sort of that in the Isa rune as well. A certain amount of commerce and things were stuck earlier in the week, but then boy did they start to take off as we start getting closer back towards that sort of September back to work deadline. So to sum up and review, much of last week's rather complex and intense energies played out about as I expected, sadly, in the case of children in Syria. They were a lot worse and shocking than even I could have expected. A week of the dark messenger of the raven, indeed. Also, a week of, as I predicted, very complicated, very conflicting energies, all kind of screaming to be on that front stage, that very bad play that I wrote about last week, where each energy is saying, look at me, no, look at me, no, look at me, and finally everybody just starts tuning them out because it's just too much all at once, and you get this tendency again towards the Isa ice, I think on a personal level, of people just tuning it out, so that by the time we get to some of the news that came about today on Saturday, which I'll go into as I get into my next reading for next week, people I don't even know how much are listening anymore because it's just so overwhelming. So what do we have going into the next week? I'm talking now on Saturday, remember August 24th, 2013, and I'm looking at the time period starting around Monday, but as we'll see, some things seem to be already sort of slotting into place. So again, you can find these cards for episode 15 on the Cat's Eye web pages if you'd like to follow along. And this is how I phrased the question yesterday when I did the reading. I said, what is the most important energies and or event most likely to be playing out in the world for the week of August 26, to September 1st, 2013. The first things that strikes me about this series of cards, again, and I mentioned this in the intro, is that the Raven, the Never, Dark Messenger card is exactly in the same position in the middle of the reading as it was last week. Now this suggests straight off that a situation, it's trying to tell us that something is ongoing, perhaps birthed last week, because that birth card, it's gone on through the past week, and we're likely to see it continue. It's more likely these energies may express themselves in slightly different areas, but we're not absolutely certain of that either. Now, the first card, unlike last week, where we had all the mother energy, this week the first card is the father. Remember, this is the card with the father pointing his child in the way he should go and the way he should point his arrow. And the father is perhaps teaching the child to hunt, to support his family. He might be teaching the child to defend the tribe from outside attack. Or perhaps he may be teaching him to make attacks on enemy tribes and get their tribe more territory. So we've got all this sort of very paternal, sometimes provider, but also conqueror energy in this card, and you have to sort of read the cards around it to decide which aspects are being flagged. If last week was dominated by maternal and birth energies, this coming week will be led off by more patriarchal, male, and possibly authoritarian forces. There is absolutely nothing soft or maternal about these cards and runes at all, except in some vague hints. We'll get to the runes. But the cards are all very strong, active, decisive, and in at least 2 cases, downright negative. So what are they negative about? We can see that we have the Never Raven card in the middle and the No card at the end of this set. That's a card with the word No on it. But what else is the Father card concerned about? Because again, he starts the reading. Well, we also have the Work card. That's the card with all the gears and cogs on it that usually, means like a job or employment between the Father and the Never card. So we have Father, Work, Never. The Work card in a current events reading usually is about mundane jobs, employment, factories, corporations, etc. Although it can sometimes be a concept such as something is never going to work, especially if you put it with the Never card. So it can be a concept. But more often, it's about concrete stuff. We perhaps may be looking at a week then when well-intentioned moves on the part of the fathers, in other words, leaders of various people, tribes, nations, mayors, governors, really want to get people back to work. That may be a really big drum roll. And it may become either very stuck or perhaps go terribly wrong because we have such negative cards. I mean, normally that would be a great idea. Let's get people back to work. But there's something that doesn't seem right about it, given the other cards nearby. Or perhaps we're simply blocked out by reality. In other words, they try to do this really good thing, but the other side of Never, we have money. Now, that's the card of wealth, coins, economics, currencies, banks, banking cartels, investments, stocks, etc. No, anything to do with the financial world, it has money. So basic what we have here is the Father is pointing toward economics or jobs that may or may not ever happen because they're probably not going to happen because there is no money to pay for them. Or perhaps a job program that is underfunded or unfunded and ends. This is the kind of energy out there. I don't think that's the total expression of this, but we're also getting hints with the Never Money No card. The turmoil we see starting in the past week with that NASDAQ strike and some other the hints of the derivatives, particularly as it drew to an end in the world of stocks and macroeconomics, is set to continue. In other words, that turmoil is not going to end. If anything, it's probably going to start building and become a little bit of a roller coaster. There may also be a blockage of some sort, that Never or No card being a very powerful negative, along with actual bad news in the jobs or employment area that makes things even worse. Or perhaps even the currency or money issues will impact jobs even harder than they already have been, because you get almost this feeling of possibly, a currency crash or some sort of difficulty with money, the idea of stuck money or money never moving, that isn't good for economies. I'm not an economist, but I do know that if money stops flowing for whatever reason, it can become a difficult time and it begins to blow back on everything. So the father, or in this case possibly the fathers, seem to be trying to direct their arrows, or direct their children's arrows at the situation. They're trying to send their children out to solve it, but very little is likely to be accomplished this week. There are also hints with the father card at the start of this reading that suggest a certain amount of conflict and perhaps even warfare itself could ensue that has its basis in the work, never money, no money energies of this time, at least partly. Now, here's a note for this morning. I was writing this on Friday, but at the time I got a chance to start this reading on Saturday, the U.S. was already stationing warships near Syria, and there are reported to be White House and UN meetings over possible intervention, and the meetings will be taking place this week. Hence, I now think it likely, as of Saturday, August 24th, that the dominating and coloring father card for this coming week is going to be partly or largely expressed in this possible military buildup, which could also have impacts on both jobs and money and, of course, currencies and economies. Now, back to the rest of my original reading, but keep this in mind that this is how I think the father card is most likely to color everything. Because remember, the first card in a reading, like last week's card, was birth. This week's card is father, and it's going to spread out throughout the entire week. Back to the runes. We do find tiny bits of feminine energy to smooth the other starkly masculine feel of the rest of the reading, but it's pretty mild. Because we have Sawilo, which is strength, or the sun in the Germanic, but in the German cosmology, the sun is female. So she's a strong, bright queen of the day, basically. So she's female, but she's a female and more of a sort of stronger, handsome, almost, I don't want to use Hillary Clinton or, Angela Merkel or, when you think of leaders, or Boudica. Boudica might actually be the best description, the warrior queen of the day. So she's female, and she's got a softer side, particularly at dawn, like we saw last week. But, this week with Sawilo, she's like full-blown day here and in her strong element. And what this suggests is that the issues that began at dawn with Dagush last week are likely to reach their full or at least greater exposure this week, along with heightening the likelihood of actual solar issues like solar flares. And continued problems or information coming out of the Japan nuclear disaster and even the lightning-caused forest fires, because another symbol that Sawilo can exhibit is the lightning. So we have, again, the possibility, sadly, for more of those and continued difficulties around Japan, or other possibly nuclear issues. And that can't be ignored either, especially given the buildup perhaps in the Middle East and in that whole part of the world in terms of warfare or possible conflict, because again, with Sawilo, you often have this sort of nuclear element. There may also be business issues with drought, heat, and other sun-related problems in various places that again could play out to affect the economy and commodities. And there may also be, this is the good news, some very nice late summer weather here in the Northern Hemisphere, which is a bit of good news in the midst of all this doom. So we do have Mama Sun kind of shining down on us a bit and hopefully making things a little less gloomy. Now, the Fehu rune, which is the last rune in the reading, is all about money and sex. The rune itself means cattle or wealth, which was the ancient Germanic form of money. So we have a nearly exact repeat of money, wealth, being the major, if not the major, current events theme of this week, because we have the money card and we had the Fehu rune together, along with possible crossovers with issues of battles or problems even perhaps with sexuality and reproduction. Fehu is often associated with gold, so looking at the gold market to move in interesting ways up or down if you follow those things. And again, I'm not an economist, but they may be a place to look, because with the sun energy, it could go up or down, as I said, but it appears to be a focus, like the sun glinting off the gold of Fehu. So pay attention to gold this week. So overall, the rest of the week, look for stories about top-down programs to try and increase employment, or even employment directives in some places or some countries. Lots of stories about employment itself, sometimes unions being affected negatively by the economic and money situation or employees. I mean, even more than usual. The no money card combination hints at a possible economic, currency, even stock market banking situation that gets stuck or halted again, or just doesn't work, just stops flat out working. Well, the Father card suggests that while economic issues may be the main story, the stories about the misuse of authority and growing militarization of the police and society, or even actual warfare and battles, will continue to color the entire week. And remember, I wrote this yesterday on Friday. The Sun and Fehu add some brightness, both of them, to this otherwise really dark and kind of broody sort of energy, but could as easily act as sparks that light up a match as giving clear sight to those who are looking and seeking for answers. So you want to be careful how you use that energy. The Fehu rune, while often positive, is particularly concerning here in this position with the money card and all the no and negatives, because it has traditionally been associated with battles over money and sex, which is just not what you want to see in a reading like this. My husband, rune master and Dr. Ph.D. in Old Norse Studies from Cambridge, has been known to talk about how the entire Rheingold saga, made famous by Wagner's operas, is really, in those operas, 8 hours explaining the Fehu rune. Pretty much endless battles over gold and sex that all end up in tears. I hope this weekend does not end in tears for individuals, and the week that follows, and the week after, but current events like last week and this week are just not looking good. It is, however, looking somewhat less complicated and more straightforward in the things that individuals need to watch out for. We're starting to focus more on the money, economics, and that father authoritarian directive, possibly battle plans, as opposed to all these different energies screaming at us at the same time. So we'll be looking primarily at threats or issues around jobs, money, and again, that authority that may lead people off in directions that may not be the best choices for them. So this week, on a personal level, it's going to involve being very careful about your personal finances, selecting good and sound advice to follow, while not allowing yourself to simply be dictated to. And I don't mean that just in finances. This is going to be a week when there's going to be a tendency of people who have that in their personality already to want to give orders, to give them, and the rest of us is sort of to say, yes, sir, without thinking about it. Well, I'll do that. Yes, sir. Or yes, ma'am. And this is like you want to think about it before you do. This is a time when some jobs may also be in danger, so you should be ready and aware of what's going on in your personal workplace or perhaps your own job hunting situation. The good news is you can draw personally on some of the good, that strong female solar energy in the runes, to contradict some of the heavy, father, dark, raven, message, negative, no energy that seems to be looming out there in the macro world that's going to color your life because it's there, but it isn't necessarily your personal life. The sun can help here to keep you warm, it can keep you strong, it can keep you focused, and keep you aware that while the bright energy of Fehu can be directed to keep your own personal wealth intact and glowing, it can also, at least things are not stuck somewhere and is unable to move as they were last week. But again, be careful. Remember, all that glitters is not gold. And that's the real message of Fehu here, as well as having an influence on livestock and cattle and other commodities, which leads us to remember that both the money card and Fehu incorporate other forms of wealth than just actual money in the form of currency. The money card itself shows a farmer plowing his field, working towards the harvest that he can consume and support his family with. So even if he doesn't find a buried treasure that's right underneath his plow that's coinage, he'll still have a wealth. He'll still be able to sustain himself. The Father card, in its best sense, when it's positive and nurturing, is also about the teaching of children to become responsible adults and providers. Well, the Fehu rune is again about cattle, livestock, sort of the things that we need that can be traded as a currency if we don't have actual money. but also milked for things like dairy products or consumed as meat. So again, it's wealth that you can hold that is more than coinage. It's wealth that you can actually utilize if you need to, either as trade or for personal consumption. So this is a really good time period to look for your own personal sort of commodities trading, as it were. Become your own commodities trader and take care to have some non-cash or non-money forms of wealth at home in case the other currency market gets stuck for a while. And primarily of those would be like food, water, ways to keep warm if you're worried about being cold, useful clothing, this sort of thing. I'm not saying go overboard, but I'm just saying this is a really good time to look for that kind of even moderately small amounts of just putting things away. So if you can't, if things don't work for several weeks, your family's not going to be cold or too hot or too hungry. Other than that, right now I would say enjoy the good weather if you're lucky to have it. We're having a nice moderate period here in Ireland. Keep some cash at home if you can also. Just because, again, it may be useful if things shut down or that no money just coming out of the ATM. Just pay attention to the outside world this week, because events there could really affect your pocketbook and you personally if this thing plays out the way that it could. I'm not saying that it will, but if it does get that intense and something actually goes, say, all pear-shaped, as they say on this side of the water, with the economic world, and you wake up one morning and your paycheck is late, or the bank is frozen, if you have some cash at home along with the food and water, you should be fine at least for a while. It gives you sort of a breathing space to see what's going to happen next. And this whole no money thing and possibly world conflict or Middle Eastern conflict with fathers seems to be a major theme coming this week. Though, as usual, we'll simply have to see how it pans out and review again when we get the chance. It could be that one of the other slightly lesser energies, I won't say lesser actually because that sounds like it's minor, but less prominent energies like the Japan situation could start to also to color things during the week as well, because this hasn't totally gone away. But in general, I think that most of the headlights are going to spot the economic stuff and possibly the military buildup as well this week. Well, that was another rather intense reading for the coming week, and I think it probably signifies last week's birth card in coming into a rather intense period of time. And again, that was last week's card of the week, so that sort of indicator that was that something new was coming into being, or a situation was developing, and I think we're seeing that now. I think this whole mothers, children, and now the economics are playing in, and I hope this is not actually a march to war, but it won't really surprise me if we see one. Now, I may do a follow-up readings on my blog this week if you want to go to melodipsychicreadings.com and follow Card of the Day, because this sort of thing is changeable. Things like wars and conflict, and even to a lesser degree money and macroeconomic issues, they're subject to the will and decisions by people. People have to decide to pick up arms and fight each other, or people have to decide to lower or raise the federal interest rate in a various country or whatever. They have to decide to play currency games or buy derivatives. So eventually situations may get so bad that the actions of individual people no longer really affect the outcome. But I think particularly in the case of this possible military buildup, we're still in this early period where we've seen in readings from the past, both in my blog and here on the show in the last 15 weeks, this sort of build-up towards what seems to be a planned war, possibly involving economics, has been going on for a very long time. It now looks like there may be the triggers to at least get the first part of that started. But whether or not it does depends greatly on decisions made by human beings in the next few days. The cards can merely tell us that the energies are there for this to possibly take place. They don't say that it will, because again, that depends on the will of individuals. I do not believe the future is absolutely fixed. If it was, there would be no reason to do these readings because you couldn't change anything anyway. Oh, I suppose it would be interesting to possibly know your quote-unquote fate, but I prefer the image of a river that I can see that rapids are coming, so maybe I want to take the other way that when the fork in that river, or possibly get out and walk around the rapids and then carrying my boat and then get back in when possible. Sometimes that's the harder way to go, but sometimes that makes a bit more sense. Anyway, we'll just need to keep our eyes peeled on the world around us. I will try to keep track of things on the blog and here on the show. Meanwhile, I want everyone to take care of yourselves and your families this week. And I just want to say bright blessings and take care until we meet again here at Cat's Eye on the Future.
But here's a health to the company and one to my lass.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a glimpse of the energies coming soon into your world and into your future. Be sure to join us again next time when we explore another chapter of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Here again, but here's a health to the company and one to my lass. Let's drink and be merry, all out of one glass. Let's drink